The forest never cries without a reason, but only the kind stop long enough to listen. The storm had finally passed, leaving the ancient pines dripping with silver rain beneath the sky slowly clearing into soft evening light. Emily Carter pulled her damp cloak tighter around her shoulders as she carefully followed what remained of a narrow woodland trail. She had been gathering medicinal herbs before the weather changed without warning, and now every familiar landmark had disappeared beneath fallen branches and muddy ground. Her small basket held only a few roots and wild herbs, hardly enough to justify spending another hour in the forest, but she refused to abandon the supplies that might help someone in her village. The cool breeze carried the scent of wet earth and pine needles, broken only by the distant sound of rushing water. Emily paused beside an old cedar tree, studying the fading light overhead. If she did not find the road soon, she would have to spend the night beneath the trees. She whispered a quiet prayer for guidance before taking another careful step. Then she heard it. At first it sounded like the wind slipping through the rocks. A second later it came again, softer this time. A tiny cry, barely louder than a whisper. Emily turned toward the sound, holding her breath. The cry repeated once more, followed by another from somewhere nearby. It was not the call of an adult wolf. It was smaller, weaker, filled with confusion instead of fear. She slowly climbed over a fallen log and pushed aside a curtain of rain-soaked branches until a narrow opening appeared beneath a rocky hillside. Inside, shadows flickered across the entrance of a small den. Emily hesitated. Every lesson she had learned since childhood warned her never to enter a wolf's shelter. A protective parent could return at any moment. Yet the tiny cries continued, each one quieter than the last. Compassion overcame caution. She crouched low and stepped carefully into the shelter, making enough noise that any animal inside would know she was coming. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light, she saw 3 small wolf pups huddled together near the back wall. Their soft white and gray fur remained damp from the storm, and each tiny body trembled from the lingering cold. One lifted its head with surprising determination before letting out another weak cry. Another struggled to stand but quickly leaned against its siblings for warmth. Emily slowly knelt several feet away, keeping her hands where the little creatures could see them. "It is all right," she whispered gently. "I am not here to frighten you." The pups watched her with bright golden eyes that seemed far older than they should have been. There were no signs of an adult wolf nearby. No fresh tracks inside the den. No scent of danger. Only 3 hungry little lives wading through the silence. Emily opened her basket and found the last piece of dried venison she had packed for her own supper. She looked at it for only a moment before quietly breaking it into the smallest pieces she could manage. "I suppose you need this more than I do," she said with a warm smile as the first tiny pup cautiously took one careful step toward the stranger whose kindness had already begun changing a destiny neither of them could yet understand. Emily remained perfectly still, allowing the smallest of the 3 pups to decide whether the distance between them should disappear. The little wolf sniffed the piece of dried venison resting in her open palm before carefully taking it into its mouth. It backed away only a few inches, chewing with surprising determination while its 2 siblings watched closely. Within moments, hunger overcame hesitation. The second pup stepped forward, then the third, each accepting a small piece with gentle caution. Emily smiled softly as the last crumbs disappeared. "That was all I had," she whispered. "I hope it helps until your family comes home." The pups looked around the quiet den as though expecting someone to appear. No answer came. Only the fading sound of rain dripping from the trees outside echoed through the evening forest. Emily's heart grew heavier. She examined the entrance carefully, noticing that the storm had washed away nearly every scent and every track surrounding the shelter. Whatever had separated the little family had happened hours ago. She refused to believe they had been abandoned. More likely, the storm had scattered everyone in different directions. Still, these tiny creatures needed warmth before anything else. Emily gathered a handful of dry pine needles hidden beneath the rocky overhang and carefully arranged them beside several pieces of dead cedar wood she found tucked against the wall of the den. With a flint stone from her pocket and patient hands, she coaxed a tiny flame into life. The small fire slowly grew, filling the shelter with gentle warmth instead of smoke. The pups instinctively moved closer, stretching their damp paws toward the comforting heat. Emily removed her own wool scarf and carefully rubbed each tiny coat, drying the rainwater trapped inside the soft fur. At first the pups squirmed with uncertainty, but within minutes they relaxed beneath her careful hands. One closed its bright golden eyes. Another leaned against her knee. The smallest let out a contented sigh that sounded almost too quiet to hear. Emily laughed under her breath. "There you are. That is much better." She used a smooth wooden comb from her basket, originally meant for cleaning tangled herbs, to gently brush leaves and bits of mud from their thick coats. The three little wolves soon looked nothing like the frightened pups she had found only minutes earlier. Their fur became soft and clean, their eyes brighter, and their tails wagged with growing confidence. Outside, darkness settled across the forest. Emily glanced toward the entrance. Leaving now would mean walking unfamiliar trails through the night, and carrying three helpless pups into the wilderness would only expose them to greater danger. She quietly accepted the only choice that felt right. "We will stay here until morning," she said gently. "If your family comes back tonight, they will find you safe." The pups seemed perfectly satisfied with that decision. One climbed into her lap without invitation, another curled beside her hip, and the smallest rested against her boot, as though it had known her forever. Emily leaned back against the cool stone wall, watching the fire dance across the ceiling of the little den. She still believed their parents would return before sunrise. She could not have known that somewhere beyond the rain-soaked forest, an Alpha King and his royal guard were searching every trail with growing desperation, unaware that the greatest treasure in the kingdom had already found safety in the arms of a stranger whose kindness would soon change all of their lives. Far beyond the quiet shelter hidden beneath the rocky hillside, the forest echoed with the distant sound of galloping horses weaving between towering pines. Alpha King Lucas Ashford rode at the front of the royal search party, his dark stallion moving with unwavering determination despite the slippery ground left behind by the storm. Rain had erased nearly every trail, turning the forest floor into a maze of broken branches, scattered leaves, and shallow streams that carried away every scent his trackers hoped to follow. No one dared complain about the endless search. Every warrior understood what was at stake. The three royal pups had wandered away during the sudden storm while exploring the eastern woods under the watch of trusted guardians. When the heavy rain struck, visibility disappeared within minutes. By the time the escorts regained their bearings, the young wolves had vanished into the wilderness. Since then, every passing hour had felt heavier than the one before. Lucas guided his horse toward a patch of soft earth where one of his scouts had dismounted moments earlier. The young tracker knelt beside several nearly invisible prints before lowering his head with disappointment. "The rain washed away almost everything, Your Majesty," he said quietly. "I cannot tell which direction they continued." Lucas looked across the endless forest, his expression calm despite the growing concern beneath his steady gaze. "Then we continue searching," he answered simply. "They are alive." None of the soldiers questioned his certainty, although many silently wondered how he could remain so confident after hours without a single clear sign. An older captain rode beside him, studying the darkening sky. "Night will be here soon," he said carefully. "The forest becomes dangerous after sunset." Lucas nodded without slowing his horse. "Then we will search through the night." The captain understood there would be no argument. The Alpha King was speaking not only as a ruler but as a father. They crossed another narrow stream, where the rushing water drowned every remaining scent. Even the royal wolves traveling with the search party paused in confusion before circling aimlessly. The storm had stolen every familiar trail. Lucas quietly reached into the leather pouch fastened to his saddle and withdrew 3 small carved wooden wolves. Each one had been made years earlier as simple toys for the pups. His fingers rested briefly against the polished wood before he returned them to the pouch. The gesture lasted only a moment, but the nearby captain saw enough to understand the quiet weight his king carried. "We will find them," the captain said with gentle confidence. Lucas looked toward the endless trees stretching beyond the fading light. "I know," he replied, "because they have never faced fear alone." Neither man realized how true those words had already become. At that very moment, inside the warm little den hidden beneath the hillside, the three royal pups rested peacefully beside a young Omega whose quiet compassion had already replaced fear with comfort. As darkness settled over the kingdom, the distance separating the Alpha King from his children grew smaller with every careful step, while destiny quietly prepared a meeting that would change far more than a single family before the dawn ever arrived. The little fire continued to glow with a steady warmth, filling the quiet den with soft golden light while the cool night settled across the forest outside. Emily added one last piece of dry cedar to the small flames before wrapping her damp cloak around her shoulders. She leaned back against the smooth stone wall and released a slow breath, finally allowing herself to rest after the long and unexpected day. The three pups no longer trembled from the cold. Their tiny stomachs were full, their fur was clean, and their bright golden eyes had lost the worried look she had first seen when she entered the shelter. One by one, they wandered closer again. The largest pup climbed carefully into her lap before curling into a comfortable ball. Another rested beside her hip, pressing its warm side against her arm. The smallest circled twice before clumsily climbing onto her chest, resting its little head beneath her chin as though it had found the safest place in the world. Emily laughed quietly, afraid that even the smallest sound might disturb them. "You three certainly know how to make yourselves comfortable," she whispered with a gentle smile. None of the little wolves seemed interested in moving. Instead, they sighed with peaceful contentment, their slow breathing rising and falling together until the little den felt more like a quiet home than a place of shelter. Emily carefully adjusted her positions so none of them would slip while they slept. She brushed a few loose strands of fur away from the smallest pup's face and lightly scratched behind its tiny ear. The little wolf answered with a sleepy wiggle before nestling even closer. Outside, another cool breeze drifted through the trees, carrying the scent of fresh rain into the entrance of the den. Emily reached toward the fire and added another small branch, making certain the warmth would last through the night. She still expected an adult wolf to return before dawn, and she silently hoped that whoever found the pups would understand that she had never meant to intrude. She had only wanted them to feel safe until their family came home. Minutes slowly passed as the forest settled into complete silence. The steady rhythm of the fire blended with the gentle breathing of the sleeping pups until even Emily's heavy eyelids became impossible to resist. She looked down one last time at the tiny faces resting against her. "Tomorrow will be better," she murmured softly. "Your family will find you." Her words faded into the peaceful stillness as sleep quietly claimed her as well. The smallest pup remained tucked beneath her chin, the second rested securely across her lap, and the largest stretched comfortably against her side, their little paws draped over her as though protecting the stranger who had protected them first. The fire continued burning low and steady, casting warm light across the peaceful scene while moonlight filtered through the entrance of the den. Far away, Alpha King Lucas Ashford continued searching beneath the stars without realizing that the very moment he had prayed for was already waiting only a few miles ahead, hidden inside a quiet shelter where three royal pups had unknowingly chosen an ordinary Omega as the safest place they had ever known. Hours passed beneath the quiet canopy of stars before something changed in the forest. A cool breeze slipped through the towering pines, carrying with it a scent so familiar that every royal wolf traveling with the search party suddenly stopped at once. Their ears lifted. Their noses turned toward the eastern ridge. One after another, they moved with calm certainty instead of restless confusion. The captain noticed immediately. "They have found something," he said. Lucas Ashford did not hesitate. He urged his horse forward, following the wolves through narrow trails where broken branches and rain-soaked stones reflected pale moonlight. The farther they traveled, the calmer the wolves became. Whatever they sensed no longer carried fear. It carried home. Minutes later, the leading wolf paused beside a rocky hillside almost hidden beneath climbing vines and fallen cedar limbs. A narrow opening appeared beyond the shadows. Warm light flickered softly from inside. Lucas slowly dismounted, raising one hand to signal the others to remain where they were. No warrior questioned the silent command. The Alpha King approached the entrance alone, every careful step guided by equal parts hope and caution. He expected frightened cries. He expected frightened pups waiting in darkness. Instead, he reached the edge of the shelter and quietly stopped. The sight before him stole every word he might have spoken. A small fire still glowed gently against the stone walls, filling the den with peaceful warmth. Resting beside it was a young Omega, fast asleep with her back against a smooth rock. Her face carried the unmistakable exhaustion of someone who had given everything she had without expecting anything in return. One royal pup slept comfortably across her lap. Another rested against her shoulder with one tiny paw draped over her arm. The smallest lay beneath her chin, completely hidden beneath the edge of her cloak except for one little ear that twitched peacefully in its dreams. Nearby rested an empty basket, a simple wooden comb, and the remains of carefully divided food that had clearly been shared instead of saved. The pups looked clean, warm, and completely at peace. Lucas remained motionless at the entrance, hardly believing what he saw. These same little wolves often resisted even experienced caretakers after becoming frightened. Yet now they slept more deeply than he had seen in weeks. The oldest pup stirred for a brief moment. Lucas instinctively expected it to leap toward him. Instead, the little wolf opened sleepy golden eyes, looked directly at its father, gave the smallest wag of its tail, and quietly settled even closer against the sleeping Omega before closing its eyes again. A faint smile touched Lucas's face before disappearing beneath quiet wonder. Behind him, the captain cautiously approached the entrance, then froze just as completely. He lowered his voice until it became almost a whisper. "Your Majesty." Lucas gently lifted one hand, asking for silence, without turning around. No one inside the little den deserved to have this peaceful moment disturbed. The Alpha King continued watching the stranger who had unknowingly protected everything most precious to him, realizing that courage did not always arrive carrying a sword. Sometimes it appeared carrying nothing more than kindness, a warm fire, and a heart gentle enough to make 3 frightened royal pups believe they had already found home. Lucas remained at the entrance of the quiet den, unwilling to disturb the peaceful scene before him. The soft glow of the dying fire painted gentle shadows across the stone walls, while the 3 royal pups continued sleeping soundly against the young Omega. One rested comfortably across her lap with its tiny tail curled around her wrist. Another leaned against her shoulder, its breathing slow and even. The smallest remained nestled beneath her chin, completely relaxed, as though it had never known fear. The Alpha King had spent countless evenings trying to calm his children after restless nights. Even within the safety of the royal palace, they often woke at the slightest unfamiliar sound. Yet here, deep inside a lonely forest with someone they had supposedly never met, they slept more peacefully than he had imagined possible. Lucas quietly noticed the little details others might have overlooked. A folded corner of Emily's cloak had been carefully tucked beneath the smallest pup to keep it from touching the cold stone floor. Her empty water skin rested nearby, every drop clearly shared. The wooden comb lay beside the basket with tiny strands of freshly brushed fur still caught between its teeth. Even the small fire had been arranged with patience, its warmth reaching every corner of the den without filling the shelter with smoke. Nothing had been done carelessly. Every small act reflected quiet thoughtfulness. Behind Lucas, the captain lowered his voice. She believed they belonged to an ordinary wolf family. Lucas nodded almost imperceptibly. That is why none of this was done for reward. His eyes never left the sleeping Omega. Had she recognized the royal markings hidden beneath the pup's thick fur, many people would have acted from fear or ambition. She had acted only from kindness. One of the little wolves slowly stretched, opening sleepy golden eyes for a brief moment. The captain instinctively took half a step backward, expecting the pup to rush toward its father after finally recognizing him. Instead, the little wolf lazily climbed higher onto Emily's shoulder, tucked its nose beneath a loose strand of her hair, and drifted back to sleep almost immediately. A faint smile appeared on Lucas's face before he quietly looked away, overwhelmed by a feeling he had not expected to find that night. Relief. Not because his children had been found, but because they had been cared for by someone whose heart asked for nothing in return. Another royal guard approached silently from behind with a wool blanket folded across his arms. Lucas accepted it without speaking. He stepped carefully into the den, placing each foot with deliberate caution so the sleeping pups would not awaken. Kneeling beside the fire, he gently unfolded the blanket and draped it across Emily's shoulders without disturbing the little wolves resting against her. She stirred only slightly, whispering something too soft to understand before settling once more into peaceful sleep. The smallest pup instinctively nuzzled closer beneath the new warmth. Lucas quietly rose again, his silver eyes lingering on the stranger for one final moment. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet certainty began taking root. The moon had guided him to many victories throughout his life, but standing inside that humble shelter, surrounded by silence, warmth, and 3 peaceful children, the Alpha King sensed that the greatest gift destiny had ever placed before him was not waiting inside a palace. It was sleeping peacefully beside a fading fire, completely unaware that an entire kingdom would soon know her name. The night remained perfectly still as Lucas stepped back to the entrance of the den, choosing once again to become nothing more than a silent witness. The royal guards followed his example, keeping their distance while the warm glow of the fire continued to dance gently across the stone walls. No command was spoken. No one wished to disturb the rare peace resting inside that humble shelter. After several quiet minutes, the oldest of the 3 pups slowly opened its bright golden eyes. Lucas expected the little wolf to leap happily into his arms after finally recognizing its father. Instead, the tiny creature lifted its head only long enough to look toward him before turning back to Emily. With a tiny, contented sound, it rubbed its face against her shoulder and curled closer beneath the blanket. The second pup stretched lazily across her lap, placing one small paw over her hand as though making certain she would not disappear. Even the smallest pup remained tucked beneath her chin, breathing peacefully, without the slightest hint of worry. A quiet murmur spread through the guards standing outside. One young warrior whispered, "They have never done that with anyone except the king." An older guard slowly shook his head. "Not even then. They usually wake the moment someone approaches." Lucas heard every word but remained silent. His children had already answered the question before anyone dared ask it. They trusted the young Omega completely. The elderly royal advisor, who had arrived quietly behind the search party only moments earlier, stepped forward with measured steps and looked into the den without crossing its entrance. His thoughtful gaze rested on the 3 sleeping pups before settling on Emily. A faint expression of surprise crossed his weathered face. "I remember an old teaching," he said softly. Lucas turned toward him. "What teaching?" The advisor kept his eyes on the peaceful scene. "Long before our kingdom was built, the elders believed royal pups carried instincts untouched by pride or fear. They could recognize a heart long before adults learned to judge one." The guards exchanged uncertain glances. The old man continued, "There is a saying almost forgotten now. When royal pups choose to sleep without fear in someone's embrace, the moon has already measured that soul." Lucas looked back toward Emily. She had no royal title. She wore simple clothes still marked by rain and travel. Her basket held only ordinary herbs, an empty water skin, and a worn wooden comb. There was nothing remarkable about her appearance. Yet everything remarkable about her rested quietly inside her heart. The youngest pup suddenly shifted in its sleep, wrapping both tiny front paws around Emily's wrist before sighing with complete contentment. The movement drew another long silence from everyone watching. The advisor smiled gently. Children rarely mistake kindness for anything else. Lucas felt something inside him quietly change. Throughout his life, he had trusted wisdom, experience, and careful judgment. Tonight his children had chosen first, asking no permission from tradition or rank. They had accepted a stranger simply because she had offered warmth when they needed comfort and safety when they were afraid. Looking at the peaceful little family gathered beneath the blanket, Lucas realized that the pups had already seen something he was only beginning to understand. Before dawn ever touched the forest, the smallest hearts in the kingdom had recognized the extraordinary goodness hidden inside someone. The rest of the world would have passed without a second glance. The forest welcomed the first faint signs of approaching dawn, yet no one inside the quiet clearing seemed eager for the night to end. Lucas remained near the entrance of the den, while the royal guards respectfully waited farther back among the towering pines. The peaceful silence felt almost sacred, as though even the wind understood that something far greater than chance had unfolded beneath the humble shelter. The elderly advisor stepped closer to the Alpha King, his thoughtful eyes never leaving the sleeping Omega and the 3 royal pups gathered around her. "There is another part of the old teaching," he said quietly. Lucas glanced toward him. "I thought the stories had already been forgotten." The old man smiled faintly. Most people remembered only the ending because they believed the beginning would never happen again. Lucas listened without interrupting. The advisor continued in a calm voice that carried the weight of many generations. The ancient elders believed that when royal pups willingly surrendered their sleep to someone outside their own family, it was never because of appearance, power, or title. They believed the moon allowed young hearts to recognize what older eyes often overlooked. Lucas looked once more at Emily. She had no idea that the kingdom's future rested peacefully against her shoulder. She had expected nothing in return for her kindness. She had not searched for favor, reward, or recognition. She had simply answered the cries of frightened little creatures because leaving them alone had never been an option in her heart. The oldest pup suddenly stretched, opened sleepy golden eyes, and quietly climbed into Emily's lap before settling comfortably once again. The second nudged closer beneath the blanket, while the smallest remained curled beneath her chin with complete trust. None of them showed the slightest desire to leave her side. The advisor lowered his voice even further. The old prophecy never said the chosen heart would arrive wearing a crown. It said the chosen heart would first be recognized by those who had never learned to pretend. Lucas remained silent for several moments. As a child, he had dismissed those stories as comforting legends shared beside winter fires. Standing before this quiet scene, they no longer felt like legends. They felt like memories waiting to be remembered. One of the royal guards quietly approached with a respectful bow. "Your Majesty," he whispered, "should we wake them before sunrise?" Lucas slowly shook his head.
No.
The guard looked surprised. Lucas continued softly, "They have spent the entire night feeling safe. I will not be the reason that peace ends too soon." The answer passed through the gathered warriors with quiet admiration. They had followed their king through difficult campaigns and impossible victories, yet many had never seen such gentleness in his voice. Lucas stepped closer to the sleeping group, stopping only when he could clearly see the peaceful expressions on every little face. He realized that his children had found comfort not because someone promised to protect them, but because someone had simply chosen compassion without expecting anything in return. As pale morning light slowly reached the entrance of the den, the Alpha King understood that destiny had not announced itself with thunder or ceremony. It had arrived in complete silence, wrapped in a worn cloak, surrounded by 3 sleeping pups, patiently waiting for the world to notice what the smallest hearts had already known all along. Morning sunlight slowly filtered through the trees, filling the little den with soft golden light that gently chased away the last shadows of the night. Emily stirred beneath the warm blanket, blinking as the peaceful sounds of birdsong replaced the quiet crackling of the fading fire. For a brief moment she smiled, believing the night had been nothing more than an unexpected stop on her journey home. Then she looked down. The 3 little pups were still sleeping peacefully against her, exactly where they had settled the evening before. She laughed softly, careful not to wake them. "You certainly enjoy sleeping late," she whispered. The smallest pup answered with a sleepy stretch before curling even closer beneath her hand. Emily carefully lifted her eyes toward the entrance of the den, intending to see whether the forest trail had become safe enough to travel. Instead, she froze. Standing just beyond the morning light was a tall man dressed in a dark royal cloak embroidered with the silver crest of the Moon Kingdom. Around him stood several silent guards who lowered their eyes with quiet respect. Emily immediately recognized the symbols she had only ever seen from a distance during royal celebrations. Her heart skipped a beat. She carefully shifted without disturbing the pups and quickly bowed her head. "Your Majesty," she whispered, her voice filled with surprise. "I did not know anyone was here." Lucas Ashford stepped forward with calm, unhurried movements that carried neither anger nor accusation. "You could not have known," he answered gently. Emily looked down at the three little wolves resting peacefully against her and suddenly understood why the royal party had come. Her eyes widened. "These are yours." Lucas nodded once. "They are my children." Emily immediately looked distressed. "I am so sorry. I found them alone after the storm. I only wanted to keep them warm until their family returned. I never meant to overstep." Lucas quietly shook his head before she could say anything more. "You did exactly what every father hopes someone would do." His words caught her completely by surprise. She slowly looked up, uncertain whether she had heard correctly. Lucas glanced toward the three peaceful pups, who still showed no interest in leaving her side. The oldest finally opened its eyes, looked happily toward its father, then climbed into Emily's lap once again before settling comfortably with a tiny, satisfied sigh. A warm smile touched Lucas's face. "I searched the entire forest believing I had lost what mattered most," he said softly. "Instead, I found someone who protected them as though they were already family." Emily lowered her eyes, humbled by his kindness. Anyone would have helped them. The elderly advisor standing nearby smiled gently. "Many people would have walked away believing someone else would come. You stayed." Lucas held Emily's gaze with quiet sincerity. "They trusted you before they trusted the world again." He paused for a moment before offering the words that would remain in her heart forever. "If the smallest hearts in my kingdom can recognize goodness so completely, then I believe I should trust what they have already seen." As the three royal pups finally climbed down one by one and happily gathered around their father, they continued looking back toward Emily with bright golden eyes full of affection. Standing beneath the morning sunlight, the Alpha King realized that destiny had not entered his life through power or prophecy alone. It had arrived through the simple kindness of an ordinary Omega whose gentle heart had quietly changed the future of a family, a kingdom, and perhaps even his own forever.